I'm a 34-year-old female who is really into Halloween, like incredibly into Halloween. I was never allowed to celebrate when I was younger because my parents always told me that it was a gateway into devil worship. It really sucked, not being able to go out with friends that night. I was jealous when I saw everyone else decorating for the spooky holiday. But I was just sitting at home reading the books my parents approved of and doing the activities they allowed, like homework and cleaning. I mention all this so you understand why my obsession became a little overboard into adulthood. I guess I was making up for lost time. My parents and I had a falling out when I was in my early 20s. I finally had the courage to mention to them how much I hated my childhood. They never understood what they did wrong and thought my upbringing was as perfect as it could have been. I resented them, and by the time I was 27, I decided I no longer wanted them in my life. All I ever got was criticism from them, and all I ever wanted was to get away. So I did. I packed my bags and moved to eastern Pennsylvania. I had already graduated nursing school and had been working for about a year at that point and had chosen an apartment close to the hospital I'd be working at. I never really thought that I'd be a nurse, but my friends decided that that's what they were going to do, and being the follow-the-leader type person I am, I went along with them. I ended up actually loving it though. I'm very much a people person, so that aspect of the job really appealed to me. Blood and other typically gross things people think of that come from the human body never really freaked me out. The feeling of getting to help people and make them feel comfortable in an otherwise uncomfortable situation was always such a big reward at the end of the day. While working at the hospital for about 4 years, I eventually got to know the man who would eventually be my husband very well. His name is Andrew, but everyone called him Andy. He was working as one of the attendings at the hospital at the time. When he finally asked me to marry him, I was so happy. It had taken him 4 long years to finally pop the question, and I was honestly even a little shocked when he finally did it. When the time came around to begin planning the wedding, I was adamant that we have our wedding on Halloween. Originally, I wanted it on Halloween with a theme to match the day, but Andy said the theme was too much and I had to settle for a normal traditional wedding on the actual day of Halloween. I thought that was a pretty fair compromise, given that it was our big day and not just mine. I was able to sneak a few pumpkins into the decorations, but I figured he wouldn't mind. The day came and I was so excited. I didn't invite my parents, and if I did, I'm sure they wouldn't have come anyway since they never left the house on Halloween. It makes me laugh even writing that because it's so ridiculous and they'll never see it. When we pulled up to the venue, I was completely shocked. They had gone totally all out with the Halloween decorations. It looked incredible, like everything I had originally wanted. My first thought though was how scared I was that Andy would think that I had done it. It turns out he surprised me with the wedding I originally suggested, and it was amazing. When I walked down the aisle, I noticed everyone was even in costume. During the reception, people made toasts while staying in character with what their costumes were. It was hilarious. After about an hour went by during the reception, a loud crashing sound was heard coming from the catering tent. Everyone looked over to try to see what had happened. That's when we all saw one of the waiters come out, clutching his stomach as his shirt began to stain with blood. People began laughing and cheering. Even I did. We were at a Halloween-themed wedding, so we figured it was part of the show. I thought it was something my husband had arranged. Then one of the other waiters came running to the man's side and screamed at us to call 911. But it just made everyone cheer and whistle more. It became so loud that I couldn't even hear what the guy was saying. I got out of my seat and made my way closer to the crowd of people now surrounding the 2 very convincing actors. They had started throwing money on the 2, and the poor guy taking care of his friend had begun to cry and just kept saying please as everyone applauded them for their dedication to their role. After around 5 minutes went by with no change in what was happening right in front of us, and a large pool of blood now spreading around them, the wedding goers seemed to get bored and I watched as they started to walk away. I made my way to the front of the crowd and knelt down to let them know that they could stop now. The guy holding on to his friend looked me in the eyes as his own were wet with tears and said, "I've been trying to tell everyone this whole time. This isn't a joke. We aren't acting. This is real. My friend's bleeding out on the floor and nobody does anything to help him." I was shocked. At first, I didn't believe him and started to crack a smile, but he insisted. He told me he would have called the police, but he had to stay with his friend. He didn't know what would happen to him if he left him with a bunch of people who thought that he was faking it. He seemed like he was just panicking. That's when I screamed at the top of my lungs for everyone to be quiet and for the music to stop. I called my husband over and relayed to him the situation, and he immediately went into doctor mode. He cut the man's shirt off, which exposed a very large and deep laceration to his abdomen. Thankfully, 911 was finally called, and all we could do was put pressure on the wound and hope that our stupidity and lack of common sense wouldn't cost this poor man his life. My husband rode with him in the ambulance as police sectioned off the scene to try to figure out what exactly happened, and how that guy had gotten so badly injured during the reception. As far as we could tell, it was an accident. No one else was in the catering tent with him. They were, however, very concerned with the fact that it took 8 whole minutes for the police to be called. 8 minutes while the man was bleeding out on the floor, and everyone watched and even cheered. That night was spent waiting for news on the man's condition. He ended up needing surgery and spent multiple nights at the hospital. He was expected to make a full recovery though, and was actually really understanding about what happened that night. It turns out he managed to cut himself with one of the knives in the catering tent. He wasn't sure exactly how and said when it happened, he was more just focused on getting help as fast as possible. He said it was really unfortunate timing on a really unlucky night, but he didn't blame any of us for thinking it was an act. He actually laughed about it, saying, "Of course, that was my luck." We have stayed in touch with him, and after talking to him, he told me that he was okay with me telling the story as long as I didn't share his name or any way to identify him. He's doing a lot better now, and even owns his own catering company. Although now, he does refuse to work on Halloween night. Before I get started telling you about the worst night of my life, that was actually supposed to be the best night of my life, I have to give you a little bit of backstory to make it make sense. You see, the man I ended up marrying is the exact opposite of the man I dated in my younger years. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm a recovered drug addict. But that should also tell you something about the people I used to hang around, and at some points, date. I wasn't raised in the nicest of neighborhoods, and I didn't have the kind of parents that cared what I did or where I went. I was lucky if I came home and there was actually food in the fridge. I ended up dropping out of high school at 15 and moving in with my boyfriend at the time. He was 24. And yeah, I know what you're all thinking. A 24-year-old with a 15-year-old girl is gross and in no way okay, but I was 15, and I thought it was cool that an older guy wanted to be with me. My parents didn't even question where I was going when they saw me moving things out of the house, so I just figured everything was fine. My friends from school kept telling me not to move in with him, but I thought that they were just jealous. So I did it anyway and cut all of them out of my life. Now we'll call this guy that I moved in with Jonas. Jonas was a meth addict. I say was, but honestly, I'm 99% sure that he still is. The house I moved into was completely disgusting. Like rotting floors, mold everywhere, and random people would come in and out all day and during all hours of the night. Part of me regretted moving in with him, but I was stubborn, and I didn't want to prove my friends right. Besides, life with Jonas was fun. Or so my 15-year-old self thought. We would smoke all the time. He got me whatever I wanted by shoplifting, of course. And he was nice to me. Well, not actually nice to me. He would compliment me and tell me how amazing I was and that he loved me. But at the same time, he would hit me whenever he got high. He always apologized after, and I always forgave him. I had nowhere to go, and he always reminded me no one would ever love me as much as he did. Well, I bet you can guess what happened next. I eventually got hooked on meth. I was 16 when he first asked me if I wanted to try it. I said no a few times, but he kept pressuring me and begging me just to try it. And I finally gave in. I couldn't describe the exact feeling to you even if I wanted to. All I knew was that I needed to feel that feeling again. I think I finally realized I had a problem about a year in when I couldn't stop. I had to have it. I couldn't even go half a day without getting high. It was all I thought about, and it completely consumed me. One day, I ran into one of my childhood friends who was a few years older than me at the store when I was about 18 years old. She just gasped when she saw me. Her mouth was wide open, and she stared at me, and I knew why. I looked horrible. My teeth were rotting. My hair was disgusting. The clothes I wore were ratty and gross. I have no problem admitting that. It is what it is. When she finally managed to speak, all she said was, "What happened to you?" At that moment, all I felt was shame. I wanted to shrivel up into a little ball and disappear. We actually ended up talking for a few hours that day, and for some reason, I told her everything that had happened in the few years since we last talked. She listened to me, hugged me, and told me that she wanted to help me. Her husband worked at a rehabilitation center, and she was sure that she could get me in if I was willing. I honestly didn't think that I was ready for that, but I also knew that I probably would never be ready. I had this opportunity right in front of me to get help, and I knew so many people didn't have that. So I took it. I agreed to go to rehab. I left Jonas that night, and when he found out where I was going, anger didn't even begin to cover how he felt. He beat me, threw all my stuff on the grass outside the house, lit it on fire, and told me dying was the only way I would ever be rid of him. I said nothing. I called my friend, and she and her husband were at the house in just under 10 minutes. Jonas screamed and yelled as I got in the car. As we were driving away, he told me my life would be nothing without him. I left and never looked back. I got through rehab, and I've been clean for the past 9 years. I won't lie to you and tell you that it's been easy. It hasn't. I was instructed by one of my therapists in rehab to move out of state so I wouldn't be surrounded by the same people and places that influenced me in the first place. So I did as she said and moved to Montana. I went back to school, got my GED, and eventually went to college and graduated with a teaching degree. I got a job at the local elementary school teaching history and met the man I now call my husband. I never knew that I could be so happy or that a man could treat me so well. But there I was, the happiest I'd ever been in my life, with a stable job and an incredible relationship. When he asked me to marry him, I was overjoyed. I was so excited. I began planning immediately. And of course, the guest list would be on the small side. But that wasn't important. I was just happy to be getting married to the man of my dreams. The day of the wedding rolled around, and I was nervous. Not cold feet nervous, just nervous and excited for the day and hoping that it would be as amazing as I thought it would be. I was wrong, and I'll tell you why. The ceremony went perfectly. We said our vows, everyone cried, including me. And it was amazing. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. Then came the reception. We booked a fairly small outdoor venue and paid to have those big party tents set up in case it started to rain, and we would still be covered. People began making their toasts, and when the time came, my husband and I began our first dance together as husband and wife. As I held on to my husband's arm when we swayed to the music, I swore I was going crazy. When I saw him, I knew it had to be a dumb joke my mind was playing on me. But it was no joke. He was really there. I froze, terrified as I watched him make his way toward me, carrying something that was covered by a blood-soaked towel. I couldn't speak. I don't know why I couldn't, but no words would come out no matter how much I tried. Maybe it was a panic attack. But either way, I was desperately looking around at other people, hoping they noticed what was scaring me so bad. My husband was whispering something in my ear, but I couldn't even hear him. Everything was being tuned out, and the only thing I could focus on was Jonas getting closer and closer to me with every step he took. Finally, someone noticed, and I was relieved when I saw my husband's brother get out of his seat and physically stop Jonas from getting any closer to me. And that's when he did it. He uncovered what he was carrying and threw it right in my face. It hit me hard. Whatever it was heavy and wet and hit me with so much force, I was on the ground in seconds. I couldn't believe what was happening. I looked down and noticed that I was covered in blood. The room started spinning, and I started hyperventilating. I could hear Jonas screaming, but at that point, I couldn't focus enough on anything to tell what he was saying. And finally, I just passed out. When I woke up, I was in the back of an ambulance getting my dress cut off so they could look for wounds. They weren't exactly sure if the blood was mine or if it all came from the pig's head. Yes, you read that right. Jonas had actually thrown a severed pig's head directly at my face. I had a few cuts on my face from where the head hit me and had unfortunately swallowed some of the blood that had forced its way into my mouth on impact. My husband apparently insisted I'd be taken to the hospital to test for any diseases I may have gotten from it. After I passed out, a bunch of men and my husband's family tackled Jonas to the ground and beat him severely until he was bloody and unconscious. When the police got there, they ended up taking him to the hospital as well, where he was treated for internal injuries from the beating. I was fine apart from the mental trauma and a couple of scrapes and bruises from where I was hit. My husband and I had a second ceremony a few months later, much smaller at his parents' house, to try to make up for the day that had been ruined for both of us, and it was perfect. It's just how I wanted my wedding day to be remembered. Now, Jonas was sentenced to 4 years in prison with 5 years of probation after his eventual release. I was relieved when I heard how long his sentence was. The mental trauma that I have has been awful, but my husband always makes me feel safe. He assured me that he would never let anything happen to me like that again, and I believed him.